Welcome to Down the Wormhole with Keisha B. I'm your host, Keisha B, and in this podcast, we're going to be going deep into the wormhole or the rabbit hole. I chose wormhole because it's more associated with space, and this podcast is all about UFOs, reports, crashes, theories, all of that. So, we are going to be deep diving into the lore of UFOs. Over time, we're going to delve into the Project Blue Book files. We're going to delve into the unclassified government documents and all of that good stuff in this series. But we're going to kick off the series by starting with one of the most iconic UFO theory incidents around, and that is the Roswell incident of 1947. So let's just start with what happened. So, in July 1947, following the discovery of unusual debris near Roswell, New Mexico, the Roswell Army Airfield issued a press release claiming that they recovered a flying disc. This announcement was retracted, with officials then changing the story and saying that this was not a flying saucer or a UFO, but debris from a weather balloon. But this event had eyewitnesses, and the eyewitnesses' testimony sort of go against the weather balloon theory. The Major Jesse Marcel, he was the chief intelligence for the RAAF. That was the Roswell Army Airfield chief intelligence officer. He was one of the first to examine the debris, and he doubted that it was a weather balloon. He said that the materials didn't seem like they were from terrestrial origin. And then there was Walter Haut, who served as the public information officers for RAAF. Haut issued an initial press release about a flying disc. In a 2002 affidavit, he claimed he's not only seen the debris, but also the alien bodies. And he asserted that there was some sort of military cover-up regarding the incident at Roswell. However, the government, some almost 50 years later, this was in 1994, the U.S. Air Force released a report that attributed the debris to Project Mogul, which was a top secret initiative involving high altitude balloons designed to detect Soviet nuclear tests. This explanation aimed to clarify the nature of the materials recovered near Roswell. Now, at this point in time, we were like in the Cold War against Russia, who was also a nuclear power at that time. So, and the Cold War ended around 1989. So this is just a little bit after the ending of the Cold War that this was disclosed as a weather balloon and not a UFO. However, again, this does contradict the testimonies of the officials, because these aren't just civilians. This is like official government officials who had claimed otherwise. So keeping that in mind. So this, by 1997, it was case closed. It was weather balloon. It was not a UFO, but people are not as convinced by this, including me. I'm not fully convinced that it was just a weather balloon because, I'm not convinced. I'm just not convinced. There's too many. It seems like whenever there's a crash, whenever there's an incident like this, there is one story that comes out initially from the eyewitness, and then there's a push later, sometimes the next day, sometimes many, many years later, to discredit all of those witnesses, even if they are military personnel. And as we go through this series, it's just like a pattern that you see over and over and over again, that I think is interesting, and I cannot wait to just delve into some more stories, because these UFO encounters, these like almost supernatural encounters, just get crazier and crazier. So for recent disclosures, there's been some whistleblowers and some testimonies in recent times that sort of allude to the Roswell event and other events similar to it. We had a former military intelligence officer, Grush, testify before Congress in 2023, alleging that the U.S. government possesses non-human biologics. Sounds similar to the claim made by by Halt, that there were bodies uncovered. So it's interesting that in 2023, you're getting new reports of non-human biologics recovered from UFO crash sites, which kind of leads some credence to what Halt said in 1947. We have Luis Elizondo, former director of the Pentagon Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. Elizondo has publicly stated that the U.S. has retrieved materials of non-human origin, including from Roswell incident, and he advocates for greater transparency. And then there's the Kona Blue program. Reports have surfaced about a classified program named Kona Blue, allegedly focused on reverse engineering alien technology from recovered UFOs. So we have recent reports of non-human biologics. We have recent reports of non-human craft. We have recent reports of back engineering of non-human craft. And these all seem to, in recent times, point to some legitimacy of the eyewitness testimonies from Roswell. Then we have people like Bob Lazar. Now, I learned about him through watching things like the Joe Rogan podcast and then going down wormholes, as we call it here on this podcast. And he is like really controversial figure. And it's interesting because I mentioned that the Cold War ended in 1989 and that there seems to be like a connection between nuclear weapons and UFOs. Like, that seems to be the thing that they're interested in. We detonated the atomic bomb in 1942, I believe that was. Let me double check that. No, we detonated the atomic bomb in July 1945, not 42, 45, just 2 years prior to the Roswell incident. And I think that was the area. Yeah, the Trinity test was the detonation of the atomic bomb carried out in New Mexico. So I don't think there's a coincidence that 2 years before the Roswell incident, we had detonated and tested the first nuclear bomb, and then a UFO shows up. And I think that's probably something that they're concerned about, interested in, if we're splitting atoms and using them for weapons. I think that's something that would catch extraterrestrials' attention. It certainly seems that way. But so towards the end of the Cold War, we have this story from Bob Lazar. So in 1989, Lazar first appeared in an interview with investigative journalist George Knapp, where he alleged he was hired by the U.S. government to work at S4, which is a facility south of Area 51. And he claimed that this site had 9 alien spacecraft and that he was tasked with understanding their propulsion systems. He claimed that these craft used a gravity propulsion system, reportedly used a reactor that generated gravity waves, allowing them to bend space-time and achieve near instantaneous travel across vast differences. This kind of coincides with the whole, all the reports from U.S. Air Force officials who see a tic-tac shaped craft or a saucer shaped craft that moves in ways that we don't understand even to this day in 2024. We still don't fully understand, and they say that our military has no knowledge or does not understand this level of technology, that we don't possess this level of technology. And, it's just this really curious thing that, all of these years, like almost 80 years later, we're still seeing these things and still are not able to explain them. So yeah, that's the gravity propulsion system. And then there's, I think it's called Moscovium. Moscovium sounds like it might be close, but this is the element 115. Now, this is interesting because he asserts that the craft power source was an exotic material called element 115. So at this time, this is in the 80s, 1989. At the time, his claim element 115 was not synthesized in laboratories. Right? So it didn't exist in labs. We couldn't prove that it existed. It wasn't a thing. And then in 03, they found it. They discovered this element. Even though they said it didn't fully match Lazar's descriptions, they found out that it was, in fact, a real element. So I think that's a curious little node to his story that, you know, he was kind of seen as a kook for saying that this non-existent element was the element powering the spacecraft, and then we in fact discover this element. He also described a small reactor that produced energy by alienating matter with antimatter. And this allowed the craft to function without conventional fuel, drawing from the gravitational waves of element 115. So that was how he described this craft working. He also said that he entered the craft, he was able to go into it, and claimed that it had no seams, no right angles, and no conventional controls. The interior was minimalistic with small little chairs for being smaller than humans. And the exterior propulsion systems violated the laws of physics. And again, that's another little thing that we hear from military officials, fighter pilots, all of these people speaking out and disclosing UFO activity. Now they say it defies the laws of physics. We have no craft like this in our arsenal. We see this said over and over and over again, and here it was said in 1989. And so, of course, Bob Lazar, as many of the other officials who talk about this subject, report government secrecy, government intimidation to keep quiet about these programs. He also stated that his employment and academic credentials was erased. This is to, like, a tactic to silence him, basically, or to discredit him, so that when people did hear his story, they'd go, well, you know, he lied about this and this and this. He said he went to the school. There's no record of him. He said he worked here. There's no record of him. But I mean, how easy is it to erase someone's record? I mean, it's a curious thing. And his claims hasn't changed over the years. He still to this day is like, no, I worked there. I watched these, I studied these crafts. I worked on back engineering these crafts. Yeah, and there was even a 2018 Netflix documentary called Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Flying Saucers. And he reiterated these claims, and I think there's been a new, just like new little bits of information that he did work at this facility. There's he described the code to get into the building, like the little device with detail. Like, he had details of the inner workings of this facility that he shouldn't have had if he never worked there, which was an interesting aspect of that documentary and gave a little bit of credence to his story, in my opinion. So that is basically the facts. So of the crash, it seems to be, even in modern era, stories that corroborate with the eyewitnesses of the 1947 crash, which is what is so interesting to me, and which is really causing me to go down a UFO rabbit hole, because it's not above the realm of possibility that the government will lie to you about things. We see them lie about things that can be easily proven. So imagine what the lies they tell about things that aren't easily disproven or proven to be a lie. You know, yeah. So let's look at another interesting aspect of the Roswell crash, in my opinion, is so we know that the military detonate. So there's like a direct timeline here. So we detonated the atomic bomb in 1945, 2 years before the Roswell event. We within the same month, I believe it is, let me look at the actual name of it. Okay, so within a month, the National Security Act of 1947 was signed. The National Security Act. And what this act did was it sort of spun the development of different national security agencies, including the Civil Intelligence Agency, the CIA, within like the same month. Although the CIA wasn't officially like launched until September, it's just interesting that all of these programs went up. The Department of Defense, like all of these departments were established right after the Roswell incident. And I don't think that's a coincidence by any stretch of the imagination. I think that was by design. And then there's so much secrecy within all of these defense channels. Also, we have, just a few years later, we have another big UFO sighting incident, which we will do another episode on and go deep down the wormhole on the lights over Washington, D.C. In the 50s, there were all of these, when 1950, there were UFO sites caught on camera too, which was rare because it's not like today where everyone has a camera phone and can take pictures of the drones over New Jersey. The drones, I say in quotes, over New Jersey. This is the 50s. It's like not everyone just had a handy camera, but there were actual flying saucer UFO events caught on camera in 1950. And then there's all the fact that Harry S. Truman, our president, was just very dismissive. There seems to be, like, whenever there are these reports, a lack of curiosity, a lack of urgency, a lack of care from the government, which to me, especially when you're in the throes of a Cold War with another foreign entity, there's just the dismissal against aerial phenomenon is just interesting. And I think it's interesting now because we're sort of in a Cold War with Russia once again, and once again we're seeing anomalous activities. And if it is American craft, if it is American technology, I think people should have the right to know. We should have a right to know. Like, should we be worried? Is this Russia? Is it us? This is things that we should know as a public. It's just very interesting how history seems to repeat itself with this type of thing. Let's go into some deeper theories, because with all of this, with the knowledge that the CIA sort of came about almost, I would argue, as a direct response to the Roswell incident, I think it's interesting to point out all of the ways that there have been covert missions, secret missions, that the CIA and the government at large has uncovered themselves. To be like, oh yeah, we used to do this really weird, crazy experimentations, and we lied about these things. And all of these things that I'm about to go over were conspiracy theories. Were like there were always factions of people who were like, the government's doing this, and there was always the mainstream factions going, no, that's just a conspiracy, you're crazy. But we had covert operations to, like Operation Ajax, to overthrow Iran's prime minister, which has come out to be true. And then we staged coups in Guatemala. We had the Bay of Pigs invasions to overthrow Castro. We had MK Ultra, which was a secret program in the 50s and 60s, where they tried to use mind control and used LSD and drugs and, non-consenting test subjects and tried to psychologically torture and brainwash them, like crazy stuff. Like, if you said that in the 60s, people would be like, you're crazy. Like, of course, our government doesn't do that. But it turns out to be a real mission. There was torture methods used after 9/11 on suspected terrorists, which we know to be true. We tried to assassinate world leaders. The CIA, I should say. I shouldn't say we. There were drug trafficking reports with the Iran-Contra affair in the 80s and the use of distribution of crack cocaine. If you know about Rick Ross and all those drug lords from those times, you've heard about that, and that was considered conspiracy, and that turns out to be true. So they can't, like, all of these conspiracy, they can only keep it a secret for so long, and then it just starts to trickle out and come out little by little over time. Then there's like the influence over media. Operation Mockingbird, which was an alleged program to recruit journalists and control the media to spread propaganda. And they definitely don't do that, right? And then there's its influence and partnerships with Hollywood and shaping public perceptions through movies and media. And there's like all of these. And then there's the fact that the Pentagon cannot pass a budget audit. Like, they just can't. Like, since they started auditing the Pentagon, like, billions and billions of dollars go missing every year. And they can't account for it. And they are supposedly funding these secret programs, these black sites, where things happen that we can't know about, even though we are the taxpayer and that is our money. We can't know about these things. And then now we're starting little by little to get declassified files regarding UFOs and how they've concealed that for so long. And we have like the testimonies, like I read earlier, about how there are non-human crafts, non-human biologics, and reverse engineering programs within our government. Then there was like, there's a lot of like mystery about how much did Harry S. Truman, who was president at the time of the Roswell crash, how much did he know about UFOs? Was he one of the most briefed presidents in our history when it came to the subject? Or, yeah, there's a lot of questions about that, because it's really just, he's very dismissive about it. When I look up all the quotes from him, he's very dismissive, but there's a lot of experts and people who really, really like talk to military officials and people connected to these sightings who seem to think that he might have known more than he let on, and that he might have been a real catalyst for all of the secrecy. So someone that I really like to look to, who's all about making the case for disclosure, and that is Stephen Greer. He's a ufologist and founder of the Disclosure Project. And I was looking into what he had to say about the Roswell crash. And he says that what we know of the Roswell crash isn't the full story, that there was actually 3 UFOs were shot down during the Roswell event. So there was the one that just fell or crashed, and I can even put crash in quotations because who's to say that one wasn't shot down? Who was to say that was all of the wreckage that was left? That might have just been debris that they missed or left behind, or that fell in another location. Like, we don't know. And he also says that one extraterrestrial that was, or a biological body that was found at the crash actually survived for like 4 years, and was known to be located in Virginia up until 1951. So, like, they had an actual biological entity. This is his claim that survived that crash and that we just held somewhere. He also talks about the Men in Black involvement, and I can go down a whole wormhole about the Men in Black and how they seem to show up around these big sightings, these big publicized sightings, and how their role seems to be just to intimidate people, to keep them silent. Yeah, so that's gonna be a whole nother video and a whole nother rabbit hole that we can go down, which is all of the reports for people seeing Men in Black after encountering a strange aerial phenomenon or crashes or maybe coming face to face with a biological entity. And then he also claims that there is some legitimacy to the idea of reverse engineering, and that the government has successfully reverse engineered the recovered extraterrestrial craft, and that has kind of helped us in our technological development. We can see very clearly that we have grown like leaps and bounds technologically since the 40s. Like, if you think about what technology looked like during that time period and what it looks like now, we have grown exponentially technologically. And I don't think it's a coincidence that, there were these sightings around the 50s and 60s, and then we can go to the moon, and then we have satellites, we have GPS, we have all of these, we have so much power in the palm of our hands now that just didn't exist in the 40s. It didn't really exist in the 50s. The 60s, we saw a big leap forward. And then, like, in the 90s, we saw a big leap forward with the advent of the internet, and our computing power got better. Like, I don't think all of those things are coincidences. I think they're connected, and I think as we go deeper and deeper and deeper down these wormholes, and as we explore more and more sightings, more and more encounters, I think it would all make sense. Another wormhole that I go down often are ancient civilizations with megalithic structures that seem to have utilized technology that are even more advanced than ours, frankly, and how they too in ancient cultures attributed to extraterrestrials and things coming from the heavens or out of the sky and giving them knowledge. So I just can't wait to go down those wormholes and just expound on those even more. But that is what we have. This is just the inaugural episode. This was the inaugural case. Although it's considered solved, I think there's still more questions there. But I think they kind of we see the answers to them coming as we investigate more and more of these cases. So I can't wait to do that with you guys. Let me know what you think. Do you think we were visited, or do you think it was just Project Mogul, as they state, or is there something else there? I don't know. That's something we will talk about and discover as we keep doing episodes. Thank you guys for listening, and I will see you later.